If you have a story that you think would make a good episode, and you don't mind being recorded, please contact us via the email or Reddit links in the description. We have already started producing Season 3, and this time we're including your stories as well as ours. All events depicted in this podcast are real. However, the names, locations, and some details have been changed for the privacy of those involved. Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 6 of Walking on Eggshells with an Emotional Vampire, a podcast that above all things is about family. Before Dad was born, his family fled from Russia to China. From what I've been told, and history books will concur, this was a volatile time in Russia, punctuated by communism and tsars and gulags. And whenever Dad told us stories about our ancestry from this time, they always seemed to take a mixed tone. One half Brothers Grimm fairy tale, one half Holocaust movie. He always had stories like that. Like, I remember one story that he would always tell me was about our great-grandfather. And so he said our great-grandfather was personal bodyguard to Tsar Nicholas, which is, it's like as high as it gets. It's like being personal bodyguard to the king. And then so he said that he was at this royal banquet, and then our great-grandfather's wife was being lewd or unsavory in public, and he didn't like it. And so he got up and then he took his wife outside, and then he pulled out a pistol and he shot her in the head. And I don't know if that was our grandmother.
Great-grandmother, Jesus.
Yeah, our great-grandmother. But yeah, and so apparently he shot her in the head in this public place, and a regular person would have went to jail for that. But because he was so high up with the Tsar, he got away with it.
A terrible story.
Yeah, and so that was one story. I don't know if
he told me a version of that as well. So similar thing.
Exactly the same, or what was yours like?
Yeah, but then he told me some other gruesome things, like that.
What, did he rape her corpse or something? Like what?
No, that she was.
hell.
No, that she was gutted.
Jesus.
They literally cut.
Jeez.
Yeah, this is the story he told me, and I was just. That's why I said I had nightmares. I was just like, what the.
What, gutted before or gutted? That's how he killed her.
I don't remember. I don't remember now, but I think when they yeah, it was something to that effect, and I was just like, what? I'm not sure if I should have started with the dead wife story here. It's probably going to taint everything that comes afterwards. And I do want you to know that not all the stories that we were told were morbid, like this one. Some of them were actually kind of fun. Yeah, and so he used to tell me about his great-great-uncle Ivan, who apparently was this 7-foot-tall Cossack horseman. And Ivan used to always bring 2 stallions around with him wherever he went. And these stallions, they were beautiful horses, but they also were a little bit mischievous. And so they'd always be picking food off the dinner table or nipping it at Ivan. And the kids used to love it because he was always telling off these horses. But what they really loved was once in a while, Uncle Ivan would get roaring drunk. And when the horses were mischievous, instead of telling them off, he would beat them. Actually, now that I think about it, this story might be a little bit morbid. Everyone used to think it was hilarious.
What the hell?
Yeah, you never heard this one?
What the frick?
Do we consider beating a horse morbid? I can't even tell anymore. Whatever. It's kind of fun. Punch him in the mouth.
Just having a fucking boxing match with the horse.
Pictures of the horse on its back legs with its like little arms, you know, its front hooves is like boxing.
The horse has got boxing gloves on.
It sort of fits with that whole Russian Cossack thing, right?
It just sounds like exactly what they would do.
I guess I'll need to attach a few trigger warnings to this episode, but not for the next story. The next story is more sad than anything else. His parents fled from Russia about 10 or 15 years before he was born. And that time in Russia, that's like all of that time is peak Gulag time. And I read that book, Gulag Archipelago. That time in Russia is really bad. It's torture and death and murder. Russia's got a pretty horrific history, but this particular time is one of the worst, I think. And the family had some wealth built up. Obviously, the granddad being the Tsar's bodyguard, but they had to take that wealth, all the gold items they had, and they had to melt them down, and that gold, that melted gold, is what they used as their ticket to get on the train that got them out of Russia and into China. But it meant that when they got there, they had nothing left but the clothes on their back. When Dad would tell of the melting of the gold items to get the ticket on the train, he would always mention a gold watch that was of particular importance to the story. One of those items was a gold pocket watch, and that gold pocket watch was a gift from the Tsar, from Tsar Nicholas to our great-granddad, and it had an inscription on the back and the Tsar's royal mark. And that proved our family's connection to royalty. But of course, they had to melt it down. And also, it would be, if it was around today, that watch would be priceless. It would be in a museum.
Of course, there is no proof.
But there is no proof.
But this stuff happens a lot in Dad's stories.
It does.
If only, this didn't happen, we would have this.
But that wasn't all either. He also said that they had thousands of acres of land in Russia. And then when they fled, they didn't keep the deeds because they were useless. But then years and years later, when Dad was in Australia, the Russian government was honouring the deeds that people had during the Gulag times, and they had land taken from them. But because they didn't keep the deeds, that was all lost.
Why would you throw the paperwork away, though?
Why would you do that?
Well, if they were fleeing from Russia to China during the Gulag eras, paper's not worth anything. It's just extra weight that they have to carry.
Yes, there's 3 sheets of paper. Oh, no.
Having some knowledge now of Dad's tendency to embellish his stories, it's probably of no surprise to you that there is no physical proof of us having this exciting aristocratic background. I myself don't really believe it either, as much as I would like to. But that being said, I do think that Dad does believe these stories. And why would I believe this, you might ask? Well, that's because of the scam.
When I was in my late teens, Dad was like, I've got a big secret to tell you.
Okay.
So then when I went and saw him, he's like, I've got some inheritance coming, and I'm gonna be really, really rich, millionaire rich. But you can't tell anyone until it's gone through. I was like, okay. And then he's like, yeah, because when they're making the transfer, it's the most dangerous part, and scammers can steal the money while it's in transit.
Well, I got more to this story because, so when I was at uni, Dad called me and he said they've found the wealth that our family had from back in the Tsar times. They found the deeds to the land that we had. It's all on file in Russia, and they were looking at transferring it to my great auntie, who I never met, but she's died recently, and now I'm the only person left to inherit all that wealth. And I straight away thought, this sounds like some sort of scam.
Nigerian prince, but for Russia.
Yes, totally. And I told him straight away. I said, look, it sounds like a con. And he said, no, he said, it's not a con. I'm certain of it. He said, I've spoke to my solicitor, and my solicitor says that it's all legit. And I said, well, as long as you've got someone who you're paying to give you good advice, letting you know. But I said, it sounds really fishy to me.
There's always this magical solicitor that he talks about that gives him horrible advice, so I don't think he exists.
Yeah, he loves saying solicitor too. He doesn't want to say lawyer. I think he thinks solicitor sounds more important than lawyer. But yeah. Anyway, so he told me that getting money from Russia to Australia is really difficult. And so you need to open an account in a neutral country, then transfer the Russian funds into that account, and then from there you can get it to Australia. And I said, okay, well, I said, it doesn't sound very safe, but as long as you've got some good advice and you haven't given them any of your bank details or any private information, and don't put any money towards this. And then he said, well, I had to put some money in the account to open it, but it was only a small amount of money, so it's not a big deal. But I would later find that it was over $10,000 that he put in there, and obviously he lost it all because it was a scam.
That's fucked.
I don't really want to dwell on this scam story too much here. It's not really what this episode is about. But I do think what did happen, and the way that Dad would eventually deal with it, would make an interesting case study, and a nice look into his mental state. It might even be something to discuss with Terry, our resident clinical psychologist, at some point. But for now, the point I am trying to make here though is this. I do think Dad believes these grandiose stories of our ancestry, enough to gamble and lose a significant amount of money on it. But true or not, it doesn't really matter anyway. Because when Dad was born in China many years later, he was poor, very poor. And this, I know for a fact.
So Dad told me when he was a kid in China, his mum would tell them to pee around the house to sort of mark their territory with their pee so wolves wouldn't come close to the house.
Because they'd get attacked by the wolves?
I'm guessing, or the wolves would steal their food and eat the chickens and stuff.
I wonder if that works. I mean, I guess it sounds... I mean, he usually knows... This stuff he's usually smack on with. He knows these things.
Also that their wallpaper was newspapers.
Oh, I didn't either.
Was another story we got.
Did he say why that was, or
they were just poor and it's insulation?
Because it'd be freezing cold, right? Like China's like they had snow and everything there.
Yeah,
freezing.
And then there was also a story when they used to have dinner. They would take one piece of food off their plate and put it on a spare plate, and then the mother would give that to the homeless person that would walk around.
Huh.
And it was like, you know, you've got to, even though we're suffering, there are people suffering more. So you've got to put your little part in when you can.
I actually love that story.
So do I.
That's nice, yeah.
Dad didn't tell me that one, but I wish he told me that one because I love that story.
He did tell you that one. You guys weren't listening. It was at his 60th birthday, I think.
Yeah, probably zoned out.
That was his speech for his 60th birthday.
We were all playing Monopoly and he was doing a speech.
Oh, was he? Oh, right. I clearly missed that as well.
Well, it's a beautiful story.
What a wonderful family.
I've got a nice story actually. So he told me about his mum. So she was this resilient, resourceful woman, and what she used to do was she would go out in the field and she would pick all these different grasses that were growing around the place, and she'd be able to take those and then turn them into a meal. And it wouldn't be an amazing meal, but it'd be good. Like it'd be nutritious and satisfying, even though it was just made from just regular field grass. And this came from the fact that she was a Siberian gypsy, so she knew these gypsy tricks.
Well, I had that as well. So sometimes they would get like literally a bone with no meat or anything on it, and she would make a soup out of it for everyone to eat. Do you know what I mean? Like I heard those kind of stories where it was, you know, like they just didn't have anything, so she just had to make do with what they could find.
All of these stories paint the picture of a hard life well below the poverty line. But at the same time, they do give a bittersweet, nostalgic lens to the era they depict. But this can't be said for all the stories Dad told us. And there were some stories that made you stop and think, wow, you went through a special kind of hardship. The kind that is unique to a place like China in the mid-19th century.
I got when Dad was a child, him and his brother would pick bullets out of the Great Wall of China.
Yeah, I got that one too.
Yeah, which I think is kind of a cool thing. They were just playing and picking bullets out of the wall and stuff.
Did they do anything with those bullets?
No, I think they just used to throw them at each other or something. Just like what little kids would do, you know.
Yeah, I do know. The other one that I used to get was, so there was a lot of fighting going on around where they were, and they had a lot of dogs, and so occasionally the dogs would bring home decapitated heads, and when it happened, the mum used to grab them by the hair and then she would throw them away. And the way Dad described it was they lived near a hill or a cliff or something, and then she used to throw them off the hill and they would roll away.
That's horrible.
Horrendous, that, isn't
it? Hey, puppy dog, what have you got there? Holy shit, what the fuck?
Yeah, it's pretty bad. But he's also said that they grew up with it, so it was kind of normal. So it wasn't a big deal when it happened.
I don't like that. I do not like that. No.
Yeah, no.
Aria, you said before that Dad told you about a dead baby story or something. What was that one?
There would just be families that were unable to feed their young children. They just didn't have enough food to keep them alive, so they would just place them outside and let them freeze, and then there'd just be frozen dead babies around the place, and the dogs would eat them and stuff.
Yeah, I heard that too. It was awful. So just didn't have enough food to feed them, and they couldn't take care of them, so they had to, yeah.
And they didn't, like, the whole thing is they left them out to freeze to death, so they sort of fell asleep and they didn't really suffer because they just got so cold.
Had to do that. It's pretty awful.
Yeah, but it's just so sad.
Yeah, I remember he said that he had a younger brother, Serge, and it was a really cute baby. And he had a lot of siblings.
Ridiculous amount, yeah.
Like 12 or something, right?
Yeah, that was a lot.
Huge amount.
And big age
Yeah,
gaps.
yeah, going right through to, fully grown. And then
And
that was
they'd
the
be
thing
having
is,
children at the same time their mother would be having children. So their children be the same age so the nieces and nephews would be the same age as their brother or sister.
yeah, that and they'd always be leaving. So you'd have a favorite sister who would then grow up and leave, and they just had to because they had to find a new family, so they could survive. But then you would never see them again. Yeah, so he had a little brother named Serge. So he was only a baby. Apparently, he was a really charismatic baby, like smiled all the time, was very cute, and everybody loved him. But then he got really sick.
Pneumonia, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was pneumonia.
Yeah.
And then he died. And it's one of those stories that Dad would tell that was really heartbreaking. You could tell he was, he could tell it was a really sad memory for him. For those of you unfamiliar with Chinese history, these stories, sad as they are, may sound extreme, maybe even a little exaggerated, but for the time, I can assure you, they are completely plausible. As the end of the 1950s and early 1960s saw the Great Chinese Famine, a man-made disaster considered one of the worst in human history, with a death toll due to starvation in the range of 15 to 55 million people. It makes you think about what Dad would always say about how if anyone shows up, you always have to have a big spread of food out for them because he grew up without anything. And it makes you really appreciate how important something as little as just having food there when you arrive at someone's house is.
Like everybody's house.
Yeah, like all the relatives.
They would just always prepare food. Like even if you'd just eaten at the last house that you went to, they would put on a massive spread and you had to eat. You couldn't sit there and not eat. You had to eat something.
Yeah, it does make sense. And I guess I never really processed it before, but all our aunties and uncles, they all went through extreme hardships in their youth, and it had to affect them.
It really did.
Yeah, it was intense. Like you couldn't even imagine going through that, could you? Like that's just horrendous.
And as if starvation wasn't hardship enough to grow up through, the Great Chinese Famine was followed a few short years later by another landmark humanitarian crisis. This time, it was the Cultural Revolution, a socio-political movement launched by former chairman of the People's Republic of China, Mao Zedong. The stated purpose of the Cultural Revolution was to preserve communism in the Republic. Unfortunately, to achieve this goal came tyrannical laws that would turn citizen against citizen in the most awful and public of ways. And of all the stories that Dad would tell us from his youth, there was one from this time that has always stood out. I got from Dad, it seems like Dad's dad was quite well known in the community because he used to distill his own alcohol. He had like a little bar that he would manage.
Like a little speakeasy.
Yeah, I don't know what type of bar it was. Like, I think there was a secret aspect to it.
It's like a prohibition era or something.
Yeah, like maybe because he said there was a lot of religions and people doing fastings where they weren't supposed to drink alcohol. So Dad said that his dad was often providing a service that was, a little bit on the sly, which I love because I spent such a long time managing nightclubs and bars and strip club as well. So I feel like I can relate to that a little bit. But sometimes when you work these kind of jobs, people don't like it. And Dad said that it was probably an angry wife or a religious parent, but somebody didn't like what his dad was doing. And they accused him of being an anti-communist. And in China, during this time, one anonymous accusation was all that it took to completely change the trajectory of an entire family. And as a result of this, they got summoned to a public hearing. And when they arrived there, they got marched through the crowd by armored guards. And the crowd was screaming abuse at them. But the part of it that Dad would always focus on was the spitting. He said that the entire crowd was spitting at them. And he said that he was putting his hands up trying to block it out, but there was so much, it just kept getting through. And by the time they reached the stage, they were all covered in it. Head to toe, just saturated in random human spit. After the group was helped up onto the platform, our grandfather was separated from the rest of his family and brought to the centre of the stage to face his charges. Dad would recall his mother standing in front of the group of children with her backwards open palms facing them as a sign to stay put and not make things any worse.
And Dad said he's watching from behind his mum, looking through at his dad, and he's standing in the middle of the stage in front of the guy who's yelling out everything that he's being accused of. And as he's yelling, the crowd's getting more riled up, so the crowd's yelling and cheering. And then the man gets to the end of all of his charges, pushes him down to his knees by his shoulders, pulled a pistol out of his belt, and then he puts it to our granddad's head. And Dad said when this was happening, all the kids started to push up against the back of their mum, because instinctively they wanted to go and save their dad. And then in the middle of all of this chaos, they heard some screaming from the side of the stage, and a man came running across.
As it turned out, all of our grandfather's questionable alcohol wheelings and dealings had made him some powerful connections in the town. And on this occasion, it was enough to save his life.
And Dad said as this man ran across the stage, he was yelling these vile swear words at this man who had the pistol out. And he said he got to him and he was screaming in his face. And the thing that he focused on was the words he was using. He said the language he was using, nobody used that in polite society. They were really disgusting lower class words, which is why it had such an effect. And the man bowed his head and he lowered the pistol, and the granddad was let free.
The narrowly missed public execution impacted Dad's father greatly, and he wasn't able to shake the feeling of a gun barrel pressed against the top of his head, or the feeling that someone had it out for him, and it would only be a matter of time before they would try to have him charged again. And with the prospect of a bullet through the head in front of his children as motivation, he went to work, moving whatever family members were too young to fend for themselves to Hong Kong, where he managed to secure passage on an immigrant ship to Australia. Our dad was 13 years old when all of this happened.
It's like with all of these stories, it's not till I really go back and really think about them that I actually realize how full on they are. The whole family was watching their dad, and he was gonna get executed in front of them. Like just that is enough to cause years of trauma. And then to narrowly miss out just because your dad had some connections through distilling alcohol.
Can't miss out on that booze.
No.
But also, thank you for saving our grandfather.
Yeah. Did you two get the same story from Dad?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly the same, actually.
He always brought up the spitting. I remember that always being a big part of it for him.
Sort of like Game of Thrones, when she's walking up the street, Cersei, and they're just throwing food and spitting on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, except it's like real life and our family members, and so.
That's why I can't handle spitting, like in movies or seeing people spit. I just think it's disgusting.
I can't. I hate it like with a passion. I can't stand it.
It's just disgusting.
Maybe that's why I hate it so much, or why we hate it so much.
For sure it is. We've been conditioned by that story for our entire lives.
There are a few reasons why I've chosen to start this episode with these particular stories. One reason is because I thought it was only fair to share Dad's harrowing backstory in its entirety after all of the digs that we've taken at him in the past. And also, because these are the stories that my sisters and I grew up with hearing our entire lives. And while I am sure there is some embellishment, for the most part, I believe them. And I think my sisters do too.
So all of these stories I definitely believe. I don't know. You believe these stories too, right?
I mean, I've heard it, so I assume it's real.
Yeah, because we've both
heard the same thing, so...
Yes, exactly.
I was just going to say, it's not only told by Dad, it's also told from Mum, who heard it from Dad's mum. So it's double-backed for me.
But somewhere along the way, our faith in the validity of these stories would change, as Dad's childhood tales started to evolve, including added traumatic details that none of us had heard before.
Yeah, so you said that Dad told you a story not too long ago, like in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I did.
But you don't really believe it.
Yes.
Tell us that one.
So I think it was Dad and maybe his brother, or I don't know, or his friend or someone. They were in the forest. I think they may have been like setting traps or something to catch animals, and they came across a dead body that had been sort of half eaten or something. And they were like, oh, like, shit, there's like a dead body there. And then they heard a rustling in the trees or something, and it was like a cannibal.
Oh gosh.
And then the cannibals started like running towards them and chasing them, and they ran away, and they were almost caught by the cannibal and were going to be eaten.
Was it a cannibal or a zombie? The way you're talking is like it's a zombie.
I mean, it was...
Was it going like, like this as it was running after them?
I wasn't there. No, it was just...
Can you make it a zombie? I'd like the story. I think I'd enjoy the story more if it was a zombie.
That's the story I got.
All of a sudden, he has this fantastical zombie story.
They just saw something was chasing after them, and it was a person.
I'm not really
And
buying it.
they were like crazed or something, and they ran away from it, and that was about it. I mean, they were children.
You are boss.
Clearly, you can hear my skepticism towards this story. I just find it very hard to believe that Dad would never have brought it up before. As we know, the man loves to spin a good tale, and zombie cannibals would fit perfectly into his childhood trauma catalogue. But before we discount it as fiction completely, there is something I should mention. While doing research for this episode, I did come across the following passage. During the Great Chinese Famine, people had to resort to every possible means to survive, from eating soil and poisons, to stealing and killing, and even consuming human flesh. And there are widespread oral reports, though little official documentation, of human cannibalism being practiced in various forms as a result of the famine. So, yeah, I guess Dad's story is not as far-fetched as it seems then.
You are plausible.
But that being said, I still don't believe it. And before you think I'm being overly skeptical, I think you need to take a listen to another of his stories. One that's not quite so plausible. Here's one that he told me over Easter dinner a few years back.
He told me at some point that his dad was put in a Chinese jail. And he said it was for some period of time. It wasn't just overnight or something. It was for a while. And he also told me that at the time, Chinese jailers didn't give their prisoners food. So if you had a family member or someone in jail, if you couldn't smuggle them food, then they would die of starvation. And so for some reason, I think Dad said it was because he was the youngest and the smallest, he was able to sneak into the jail every day and bring food to his dad. So every day, his mum would bring him to the jail, she would distract the guards, and he would sneak in with the prisoners with food and then feed the dad. But that wasn't all. He then went on to say, and he got very emotional when he talked about it. He said, I didn't realize this at the time, but I do now when I think about it. When my mum used to take me to the prison, she would always get dressed up really nice, and she would go and distract the guards. And when she'd distract the guards, she would take them into a room somewhere. And I know now that she was having sex with them. And I remember doing like she was what? And he said, yeah, that's what she did to save my father. That's what she did to protect her husband. She prostituted herself.
What a wonderful story.
Yeah, I know, right? Happy Easter, motherfucker. Yeah, your grandma was a prostitute.
Yes, I heard that too.
When did he tell you? Was it at a special occasion? They love doing these things at special occasions.
I don't know. To be honest, it was a little bit traumatic because it was late at night and I actually wanted to go to bed. And then he's like, "Yeah, I've got to tell you
Oh,
this
you need to
story."
go to
And then he-
sleep? Let me tell you this story. It's a lovely bedtime story.
Yes, sleep tight. Your grandma's a disease-ridden whore.
Meanwhile, I'm like,
was that the same time that he told you about the gutting the great grandmother for being lewd in public?
"Let me tell you a bedtime story."
Yeah, he's like, yeah, but don't even worry about her. That was the grandma before.
Yeah, so yeah, it doesn't matter. You're not related anyway. It's fine.
Yours didn't get gutted, just the other ones.
She stayed in line.
She wouldn't be lippy in public.
Wait, was he telling you this story so you'd respect your husband more?
It's like when Dad was saying about your shorts or whatever you're wearing. What was it?
Thanks.
What was it? It's like a woman knows how to dress properly.
Yeah, some clothing's not appropriate with women with a bit more weight on.
It's like back in Russia, you would have been gutted for less than
Yeah,
that.
You're lucky I don't have a pistol right now.
If only I had my son Nicholas gold watch. I'm sure Vladimir Putin wouldn't mind if I gutted my own daughter for wearing hot pants.
They weren't even hot pants. They were shorts. They were just normal shorts.
Just leather shorts. I understand.
They weren't leather, they were jeans.
Jean shorts
with the butt cut out.
with that curve around the arse cheeks.
No, not the
Not better, Aria. Not better.
the Jessica Simpson one. Just normal shorts that just finished above the knee. They weren't.
Just finished above the butt crack. The butt
No,
Just finished 60 centimeters above the
just
knee.
normal shorts.
I think I got sidetracked here for a second. What was I talking about again? Oh yeah, the way that I'm pretty sure that Dad invented a story about his mother having transactional sex with prison guards. And if you're wondering, no, none of the research that I did on this came up as plausible.
Super busted.
So why would he tell me this story at all, if it's not true? Well, I do have a theory about this, and this theory starts with another dad conversation.
This is like a few years back. And then Dad's like, oh, I've got to show you this picture that I got sent. And he pulls out his phone and he's got this picture that one of the relatives has scanned. And it's a black and white photo of Dad when he's a kid. And this is super rare. I don't think I've ever seen a picture of Dad when he's young. And he's in a very Australian-looking school uniform. He's probably about 14 years old. And he's got this big cheesy grin on his face. And I saw the picture, and typically I said, oh, look, you're a happy bloke. Look at the happy bloke on there. And did like a stupid thing, like I was pinching his cheeks and going like, la, 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 like that. Yeah. But then he went super serious, and he said, at that point, I'd actually managed to forget the things that happened to me. I said, okay. This kills the mood. And he said, yeah, back then I'd managed to repress the traumatic memories. And I remember thinking, repressed memories, that's a sentence that's never come out of Dad's mouth before.
No, and he did tell some like sad stories, but he always tried to find some positive. Like,
well, and that's why this particular story stuck out to me, because I think this was the exact time when the way he told stories changed, and it all became about getting sympathy off the listener. It's super unflattering.
You might remember back in season 1 when I was talking about how Dad started crying all the time and it irking me. This is what I was talking about. All of a sudden, in his 50s, every story that he had became a watery-eyed melodrama.
It's a wonder that I'm coping because of all the past trauma that I've had. There's a definite flip.
Yeah, because then you'd like, I know I would try and change the subject into something else, but then he'd always kind of turn it back round to
the depressive bullshit. Yeah.
This has probably got something to do with my anti-victim, never cry, masculine bravado bullshit. But I hate this version of Dad. And more than that, I just don't believe that any of it is genuine. I mean, are repressed memories even a real thing? Let's see what Wikipedia has to say about it. Repressed memory is a controversial and largely discredited psychiatric phenomenon, which involves an inability to recall autobiographical information, usually of a traumatic or stressful nature. The concept originated in psychoanalytic theory, where repression is understood as a defense mechanism that excludes unacceptable impulses from consciousness. But this theory is presently considered largely unsupported by research. This passage doesn't totally discredit repressed memories, and neither did any of the other articles that I found about it. But they certainly do make it sound, at the very least, very, very rare. And nowhere near as common as implanted or invented false memories. You know, like Aria's memory cabinets. So do I think that Dad has repressed memories? I do not. Do I think that Dad has invented these memories? I do. But more importantly, do I think that these memories have been implanted into Dad's brain, Inception style, by someone else? You know what? I kind of think they have.
Previously, he'd tell a story and like teach you a lesson, but then now he'd tell a story and wait for the sympathy, which I feel like is what he was doing with her.
Yeah, he got trained to do this.
yeah.
And in case you haven't guessed yet, we are talking about Dad's ex-girlfriend, Mary, here.
And he never was like that before. And also, he'd put on like his lower back pain and his limp more when she was around, but when she wasn't there, he would be walking around fine.
Yeah.
And it was very strange.
Yeah, he'd kind of almost suck it up a little bit and just be like, okay, so I've got some pain here, whatever. But when she was there, he'd be like limping and make it look worse than if he was just with us, you know.
Well, that's what she'd constantly say.
And to clarify, I'm not blaming Mary exclusively for Dad's melodramatic turn, but I do think that she was a catalyst.
Every time I'd go over there, she would say, he really should be in a wheelchair now, but he's too proud for that, but he's in so much pain all the time, he needs to be in a wheelchair. And this is like years of her saying that. She's like, in the next 6 months, he'll definitely be in a wheelchair. And it's like, no, he's obviously not in the best shape, but he's not crawling around on his hands or knees or anything.
You see, Mary had what I would call an overzealous interest in digging into any memories that you might find painful or traumatic.
Well, she used to. For me, there was a bit about, like, obviously my biological mother, so she'd try and bring that up, which, to be honest, I didn't want to talk about because I just wasn't interested in that. But she used to ask me questions and then trying to get some sort of I'm going to say information out of you. I don't know what to call it. Like, it was just trying to draw the emotions out.
And this tendency to draw the emotions out was more than just a personality trait for Mary. I think she saw it as her calling, a calling that initially led her to volunteer as a phone counsellor, but later to become a practicing physician and then the regional director for a string of specialised healthcare clinics. And please note that I am doing the inverted commas fingers when I say healthcare, as the form of treatments that these clinics give has, at best, been described as a debunked kind of pseudoscience, and at worst, a form of health fraud that takes advantage of vulnerable people. I'm not going to give the name of these clinics here, as they are still functioning, and at this point in my life, I'm not ready to get sued by a multinational company. But who knows, maybe somewhere down the line, when I do my Murder Castle episode, I can look at doing an expose on Mary's pseudoscience. But until then, I should make something clear. I don't think that Mary was knowingly scamming people with her practice. As with the practitioners of something like Scientology, Mary was, and is, a true believer. And she honestly thinks that she is helping people. She just has a cognitive blind spot when it comes to the criticisms of science. The same sort of cognitive blind spot that I see that she has for Dad's invented memories that she keeps pulling out of him. And as much as we tried to dissuade her from doing this, at every opportunity, she would encourage us to do the same.
But I actually went to Mary and then I said, I don't think that these stories that he's telling, I don't think a lot of these are true. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, he's told us a lot of memories from his past. These ones he's telling now, they seem much more extreme. I don't really believe them. And she said, no, he went through real trauma. And I said, no, I'm not doubting. I know he went through trauma in his childhood, but these memories now, we've heard a lot of his stories, and these are details, these extreme details he's never said before. And then she cut me off and she said, no, they're repressed memories. That's why you haven't heard them. He'd repressed his trauma, and that's why he's getting it out now. And it was a bit of a dead end argument. So I just sort of went like, okay, yeah, well, look, it's just how I feel.
But she fed into his need for attention as well.
Yeah.
So she asked me constantly to sit down with Dad and interview him and record him about his life. She's like, you need to spend an hour once a week and record all of his life stories because he's really afraid he's not going to be around for long and you need to get these down.
Did you do it?
I was like, what? Why is this my job?
Yeah, you do it.
Not to dwell too much on the irony of the fact that we are literally recording a podcast about Dad's life story, I want to move on to another tangent that may or may not be relevant. You might remember from previous episodes us talking about the mother-child relationship that Dad and Mary
He
had.
got up and he went, oh, and she literally sprang off her chair and ran over to him, like, oh, are you right? And,
Mummy.
yeah, and but then he was like, get off me, I'm fine, you know, like, and then he'd be like,
Obviously, Dad loved having all of Mary's attention and being told how hard his life had been and how brave he was. But what did Mary get out of the relationship?
Well, and I think it's got something to do as well because Mary never had kids and she wanted kids And they, like, her and dad were even looking at being foster parents, but then they didn't get accepted. I think they didn't get accepted because dad blew the interview because I think he said some inappropriate things. But yeah, and so I think there was something as well there with her feeling like she needed a child or didn't have a child to nurture or something. I really get that impression too. Not
Yeah,
that I'm
that was a thing actually, because they came to stay here once, and it was Mother's Day here. It was like a Sunday, and Dad actually went, oh, it'd be nice if the kids could bring her like a Mother's Day present. And I was just like, what? And anyway, so I just happened to have like a spare like mug thing that I had, and it said something. So I gave it to the kids. And I just, give it to Mary kind of thing.
so weird.
But it was so weird. I was just so weirded out by it. I was just like, this is so weird. I can't.
That's one of the worst things I've ever heard.
It was the weirdest thing I've ever heard. And he kept like every time we seen him, he kept going on about this child thing. And I was like,
what did she do when she got the present from them?
oh, I think she loved it, and she was like elated and whatever. But I was just kind of like, this is just too weird for me. I can't.
I remember one time it was around Christmas and Riggins and I went over and Dad was going to cook some Russian food and Mary was like there and then all of a sudden she was gone and we're like, oh, is she going to eat lunch with us? And he's like, Christmas is a really hard time for her because she doesn't have kids, so she's just gone for a walk. And then she literally didn't come back for 3 hours. It's super strange.
It's what happened. Obviously, she didn't have kids. Whether she couldn't or not, I don't know. But
I think she could. I think she just didn't find someone or waited too long.
Like you've just got to kind of get over that part, because unfortunately that's just what happened. Do you know what I mean? And you've tried other scenarios. Maybe it just didn't work. Whatever. But you've got to go, okay, well, that's it. Like let's move on.
We might be being unsympathetic here, and the longing for children that you can never have must be a terrible thing that shouldn't be downplayed. And even with the complicated feelings that I have towards Mary, it is still something I wish she didn't have to endure. But to nudge us back on track, the point that I'm trying to get across here is that both Dad and Mary brought their fair share of baggage to the relationship. And it's my opinion that it was the weight of all this combined baggage that created a pairing that was ultimately a toxic one. And before I wrap up this episode, I'd like to summarize the phases of their relationship to get everyone up to date. Firstly, there was the honeymoon phase. This was the first few years that they were together, and the messed up part about it is that it seems to have been based entirely on their mutual disdain for Mum.
But I'll be honest, I think that their initial coming together, the attraction was based on them both ripping on Mum, and that was it. That's how they came together. Like, how fucking weird is that?
It was really fucked up. And it was bad because she's constantly bringing up Mum to Dad instead of Dad getting over it, because what had it been, like 6 or 7 years at that point?
Like, it seemed like he talked less about Mum when he was with Bulldog Face.
100%.
Well, she probably didn't want to hear it because she's not an idiot in that way. You know what I mean? Like,
no, but she wouldn't put up with it.
Yeah.
Bulldog Face was, you're with me, you focus on me.
We don't want to hear about your ex.
That's admirable for her, like, but
totally.
Like, that's a good quality. You don't want to dwell on your past relationships at all. But she made him dwell, and it was a real sore spot for him, Mum.
I don't want to dwell too much on this first phase. I think you all get it. And if not, you can always revisit the White Album episode. It's all there. The second phase you should know too. It's the mummy-daddy phase. But in case you need a refresher, here's a quick example from Aria.
Mary might be, she might have gone to the city for the week, but she'd call me up and ask me to go and check on Dad to make sure he was doing all right. And it's very, like, a very baby thing, like getting a sitter to go and check on your child or something. Like, it was very...
And then there is the final phase, which will at last get us all up to date with Dad and Mary. This is the phase where she broke things off with Dad, causing the suicide attempt that got him committed to the psych ward. This phase I refer to as the over it phase.
One time I was over there and Mary was like, oh, get the paperwork out. And Dad got the paperwork out and he said, next month will be my last child support payment to your mother. And he's like, and it's finally done. And I'm talking like I'm in my mid-20s at this point, like, or mid to late 20s. And he's like, he's finally free. And it was like this big thing. And Mary was really happy about it. Dad was like wanting to celebrate about it.
I remember this too, because this was right towards the end of the relationship. And this is where, like, not only did Mary not enjoy ripping on Mum anymore, but Dad wasn't allowed to mention Mum. If Dad mentioned Mum, Mary would get angry about it.
But she was happy to talk about it and bring it up because it was like, yes, this is finally done. It's finally going to be over and done with. And we all knew it wasn't going to be over and done with. He's never going to get over it.
That's right. The thing that was the death blow to a relationship that was based on the mutual disdain for Mum was Dad's inability to let go of his individual disdain for Mum. How completely fucked up is that?
Well, and that's the thing is, Dad just, he couldn't help it. Like, it didn't matter. He'd have to bring up things because he hated her so much. And I guess their relationship was so based on it, he just couldn't not bring it up. So I think it became a constant problem. I think it was kind of like something that really put like a knife in their relationship.
When I started this podcast journey of discovery with my sisters, I didn't know where it would take us. I knew there were things I wanted to explore and questions that I wanted answered, but I never had an end goal. Because deep down, I don't think I ever really thought we would make it this far. But having filled in the blanks of Dad's origin story and the nuances of his troubled relationship with Mary, for the first time, I can see an end in sight. And before I hang up the headphones on Season 2, I truly believe that everybody listening will be up to date with our story. But the daunting thing about that is, the thing that gives me real pause, is that there are still 2 more episodes left. And the final 2 stories that I have to tell are the most recent and by nature, the most raw of them all. Next time, Dad loses everything.
He's a stupid old man who would just give away everything he has to a stranger because he's not family.
I think one time when I was talking to you about this and I was saying how horrible it was that Dad lost everything, and you cut me off and you said, Lucas, he didn't lose anything. He gave it all away.
Yeah, he absolutely, he didn't lose anything. He's given everything away. It's all been his choice. He just chose to give it away to this stranger.
That's next time on Walking on Eggshells with an Emotional Vampire. If you enjoyed today's episode, or if you think that you might want to be part of a future one, please let us know about it in the email or Reddit links that are in the description. Walking on Eggshells with an Emotional Vampire is produced, recorded, and edited by me, Lucas Shaw. Thanks for listening.